Hello, and welcome to this podcast with me, Sarah Rundell from Treasury Today Group. AI is beginning to transform cash flow forecasting to give Treasury teams much better insights and visibility on the money coming in and going out of the business, supporting the hedging strategies that corporate treasurers use to navigate and protect against changes in interest rates, FX, or commodities. The markets team at Standard Chartered in New York is already using AI to help their corporate clients make cash flow hedging decisions, overseen by Thomas Kikis, Managing Director and Head of Markets US and Americas. He joins me now to discuss how AI is both shaping corporate cash flow hedging strategies and how he sees the interaction between humans and AI increasingly playing out. Thomas, welcome.
Hi, Sarah. Good morning from New York.
Hi. So I think probably a good place to begin is, could you give a bit of background on your role and share a few key observations on how you've seen AI begin to transform what you do regarding cash flow forecasting and liquidity management? It'd be great to hear what new insights the technology is bringing, what problems it's solving, and to what extent can AI get rid of that proverbial headache treasurers have long associated with their cash flow management.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Yeah, I'll get into it. While I am not a treasurer of a corporation, I effectively am the treasurer here of this dealing room. So I understand what our corporate treasurers who would be listening to this podcast deal with, meaning liquidity management and how to make sure that you're always liquid and well-funded, risk management, how you manage your FX options, your credit risk, your commodity risk. That's part of our life. And then finally, how do you optimize for all of the systems you have, both booking, but increasingly artificial intelligence systems to help you understand what your cash flows are, what your risks are, and really helping you predict how to best understand the risks that are coming and how to best protect with them. A little bit about Standard Chartered. We are a bank very focused on Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. 90% of our originated income comes from these regions. We are in 54 markets that span Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. And in many of those markets, we are a retail bank, an affluent bank where we actually take people's deposits and make loans. But in all of those markets, we have the cash rails, we make the cash payments, we make the cash receipts. Thus, we are using ourselves to affect payments. And we've been in these places for a long time. So as someone who's been at the bank almost 3 decades, I've spent most of my career helping clients navigate what are the complexities of Asia, Africa, Middle East. And a final point, I think of some of the first times I spent in London and watching these various drivers on mopeds with an A to Z map of London open up in front of them. And I finally got the courage to ask someone what in the world they were doing. And they were studying for the knowledge, which is the great black cab driving exam. I feel in many ways what I've done at the bank is help people navigate not the streets of London, but the payment rails of the world and how to get money in and out. And what we are putting into AI is a lot of this knowledge, is the ability to interrogate, how do I inject capital into Malaysia? How do I make a dividend payment out of Nigeria? What is the market structure of Kenya? These are the sorts of things that AI is helping with in really helping people understand how to move around the world. And then, of course, you've got many other aspects of AI, which gets into more data-specific items in terms of managing your cash flows. But we'll have a lot of time to talk about that. So I'll hand back to you, Sarah.
Oh, yeah, I love that analogy of trying to map read in London. So could you talk a little bit more about the sort of benefits and the challenges around AI in cash flow management?
Of course. You said the headache. And let me begin by saying I don't think the headache is ever going to go away. Because to start this conversation, I still think I still think the treasurer and the treasury team will be core to every decision that is made. AI will help, will be a tool, should be something that assists us in understanding what the risks are and being able to be a lot more specific about it. But I don't think the headache will ever go away because I don't think the ultimate decision will ever go away. So that's what I start with. That said, artificial intelligence really should be better at predicting cash flows, at understanding what the patterns are, what the various inputs are that allows us to ultimately be more precise in our forecasts and more precise in the hedging instruments and amounts and tenors that we use. Let me take a step back. what are the basic parameters of a cash flow program? It's your opening cash balances. That's less of an AI thing. That's more of a real nuts and bolts of having your treasury systems give you specifically what your cash is. But where the AI can really help is in projecting your sales, projecting what investments and investment returns are going to be, what in terms of outflows, what's your payroll and inventory outflow? What are your taxes and other expenses that you have? I think that's where AI is going to be very helpful in helping you understand what the trajectory is on those items. And that should help you understand what your closing cash balance is. And that's ultimately what you need to then hedge or protect yourself from. So the end and the beginning of the cash flow forecast, I think, is going to be very dependent on the systems that sit within a client, but it's the predictive elements in the middle of it that AI should really make a difference on.
Okay. So could you give a bit more detail of a use case where AI insights could really add to the bottom line when it comes to cash flow management?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the fun parts of my job is getting to travel the world and travel the country and speaking to various treasurers. And I think it's the inputs that you'll put into AI that really matter. And I will note that some of the treasurers told me that the danger of having too many inputs in an artificial intelligence model where you try to forecast just about everything from cars in a parking lot to the price of oil and the impact of your purchases or the price of gas and the impact of miles traveled. You can get really kind of specific and almost try to boil the ocean if you have too many inputs. But one of the real benefits should be that you have the right amount to hedge, that you're not overhedged or underhedged. And as much as I like Sarah, when clients call me and want to trade, you can also call too often or need to trade in and out of the market, which there's a natural cost associated with that. That is ultimately not good for a client's bottom line. So trading correctly and precisely the first time is an immediate saver, and being very specific about when your forecasts are going to come and when you're going to need to hedge something is a cost saver in itself. So the more precise you are with understanding your amounts, the more specific you are at what time you'll need it, the better you can hedge, and effectively the less money you can spend on that hedge.
Oh, perfect. So it can really help the bottom line in that way. And
Absolutely.
could you talk a little bit about specific products that the trading team at Standard Chartered has maybe developed to support cash flow management that uses AI?
Of course, we have a team that spends a lot of time working with corporations in understanding their forecasts and their cash flows. And some of the tools we have in helping them mitigate the amount of hedging they need to do by understanding correlations between markets and within markets. For a bank like Standard Chartered, Sarah, emerging markets is core to what we do. And oftentimes, the cost of hedging in the emerging markets is quite high. So, being able to be specific with clients about what they could potentially use or how little of an emerging market hedge they need to use, and maybe using a correlation, is something we talk about quite a bit. Getting very specific around the type of products that you should be using in an emerging market. Is it a forward curve? Is it an options curve? Is it a non deliverable forward curve? We have the tools and the modeling on a regular basis that we use, and that's mainly an in-house tool that we produce the analysis for our clients. That spends a lot of time taking artificial intelligence and taking models and other learning into predictive forecasts, and ultimately being able to tell a client, we think that using this product, using this tenor is better and will save you money versus something else. So we spend a lot of money on those tools and getting that right.
Okay, all sounds brilliant. And what are the sort of risks around the data sources that feed these AI forecasting models? Um, what are your considerations there, and how are you helping treasurers navigate these risks?
Yeah, very good question, Sarah. As I alluded to before about the treasurer who's telling me too many inputs, you have to have your inputs right and your data needs to be correct. Otherwise, the assumptions and the predictions it makes will be wrong. And as I noted, you really can't step away from the process. Just imagine you've executed a hedge or you've put together a forecast and you've just relied on AI and you haven't had the second look or the treasurer or the assistant treasurer look and sign off. I don't think a regulator or a accounting company will ever allow that. So there is a legal risk there in the outputs that you get. So you have to really be on top of that. You have to really be on top of the data. And for us in emerging markets, data is sometimes hard to come by in emerging markets. You don't have very clean statistics on how a 5-year bond trades, for example. You sometimes need to either interpret it or go to other data sources to find exactly where something traded, or your cost of capital or your various other inputs. You need to be very clear about what data source that's coming from, if it falls down, and how to make sure you've got a human, I think, to kind of sense check and make sense of what the output is. Otherwise, you could potentially make a decision that is wrong, and something that would be certainly frowned upon.
Yeah, yeah. The issues around data in emerging markets is super interesting. So maybe you could just talk a little bit more about the interplay between human judgment and AI. Can you share an example, perhaps, of where AI got it wrong and human judgment prevailed? Do you think AI will be a decision maker ever? Will it execute? Could you share your thoughts there?
I certainly can. I think there'll be many things where AI ultimately is the decision maker, and I think those are sort of programmatic or mechanical items that AI can make a decision on. I've really learned over the years from our corporate treasurers what is an art and what is a science. So balance sheet hedging is really a science, meaning the balance sheet items and the very specific cash positions and other items within a balance sheet are really very specific. And I think in many ways, the programmatic hedging that we see our corporate clients do on their balance sheet is really very set. They know when to trade. They put it through a system. They put it through a platform. There is a lot of intelligence already built in there. And that's done on a very mechanical basis, effectively AI. Before the buzzword of AI even came through, I think corporations got very good at that science. Cash flow, though, is an art. Understanding what your cash flow is going to be, there's a real predictive element to it. And the artificial intelligence should give you a view onto that. But then how you hedge, how you take that information, how you go about it, especially, for example, for a young company, just think about it. You really don't know if your product is going to do well. You really don't know if that market's going to hold well. Even here in the Northeast, how do you predict 50 inches of snow over 3 weeks and what impact that's made on sales? And have you overhedged, or have you thought your sales were going to be something? You've taken that from AI and suddenly sales are 50% less because people couldn't get out of their homes for 3 weeks. So there needs to be a human element to that because markets change, inputs change, and I don't think ultimately AI will be able to make all decisions. As I said, it'll get rid of some of the headache, but the headache will still sit with the Treasury team that has to ultimately make the call and be responsible for it.
Okay, so headaches will continue a little. And just finally, Thomas, could you just share your thoughts on where you see AI-driven treasury and cash flow forecasting evolving in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, Sarah. I think one way to look at it is think about what we're seeing in the outside world away from markets. And I looked at quite a few medical studies and oncological research on what's happening in the space of preventative scans and various things that you can do for your own health. And people were worried that oncologists would go away because AI would be able to read every X-ray, every scan, every mammogram, and it would make every decision for you. What they've actually found that this field is actually exploding because people now are able to get tested on a more regular basis, or there's a wider set of people that are getting tested because AI can do a lot of the grunt work that then narrows down what an actual person needs to look at and make a reference point and bring to the fore. So I think we all get worried about AI. We really don't know the impact. I mean, how do you predict what it's going to do to drivers all around the world when you have cars that are completely self-driven, right? What is that going to do for an entire cohort of people who depend on that for their living and their livelihood? But we also don't know how it's going to change industries and how it's going to change human behavior. So as much as AI will change things, I still think the human will be fundamentally at its core. And I think we're seeing enough things that there could be disruption in the short term, but in the medium term, ultimately, we will be changing behavior and doing things that should ultimately impact the way of life and make hopefully life a little bit easier and less painful for all of us.
Okay, thank you. What an absolutely great discussion. Lovely to speak to you, Thomas.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a real pleasure.
So you've been listening to Standard Chartered's Thomas Kikis, Managing Director and Head of Markets, US and Americas. I'm Sarah Rundell from Treasury Today Group. Thank you for listening, and if you'd like to hear more of our podcast episodes, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from.